Good morning. Welcome to the press conference on the Commission's winter economic forecast. To remind you, this is an interim forecast which covers the GDP and inflation for 2020 and 2021 for all member states as well as the EU and euro area aggregates. This forecast, as well as the press material in English, has already been published. You will get the other language versions shortly. I will now hand over the floor to Commissioner Gentiloni for the presentation of the forecast, and after that we'll be ready to take your questions, of course. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We are presenting this winter forecast with four main messages. First message, the European economy continues to show resilience to the challenging external environment. Slow growth is continuing, driven by domestic demand. This expansion is now the longest since the introduction of the euro in 1999, almost 7 years. Economic growth is forecast to remain low and stable at 1.2% this year and next year, which is unchanged from 2019. Growth in the EU as a whole, that is the 27 without the UK, is forecast to ease marginally from 1.5% in 2019 to 1.4% both in 2020 and 2021. The economies of all EU member states are set to grow in both 2020 and 2021. Second message, the various economic forces that have emerged in recent months have largely offset one another. As a result, the outlook is broadly unchanged since the autumn, which in itself is good for a forecast, for those that are doing the forecast. Looking back at 2019, growth surprised positively in the third quarter, but this was followed by the lower-than-expected outturn in the fourth quarter. Going forward, the outlook for the European economy remains challenging. On the positive side, one can see tentative signs of stabilization in global trade and encouraging developments on the US-China trade front. There is also clarity about trading relations between the EU and the UK, but this is only from now until the end of the year, until December of this year. At the same time, still elevated policy uncertainty as well as geopolitical tensions continue to weigh on global growth prospects. Overall, when considering all these developments, our forecast for both the euro area and the EU in 2020 and 2021 remains largely unchanged from the autumn. Third message, we revised our inflation forecast marginally higher. This reflects slightly higher oil price assumptions than last autumn, and it also reflects a pickup in core inflation, providing some tentative evidence that higher wages are starting to lead to higher prices. Finally, and this is the fourth message, the outlook for the EU economy is subject to new downside risks, first and foremost the outbreak and spread of the coronavirus. Its impact on public health, human lives and economic activities remain uncertain. This will depend very much on the duration of the outbreak and on the containment measures enacted and on policy measures taken by China. Data for the second half of 2019 make it clear that domestic growth drivers remained largely intact, particularly private consumption, which has been the backbone for the euro area's low growth throughout 2019. Household incomes continued to benefit from improvements in the labour market, as well as wage increases. In several countries, fiscal measures have additionally supported incomes. Private consumption is expected to sustain its current momentum this year. This reflects the still favourable outlook for the labour market, wage settlements and above-average consumer confidence. Investment is expected to continue growing, but at a very moderate pace. Demand for investment goods remains subdued, both at home and abroad. On the positive side, low financing costs should spur construction investment, and schemes like InvestEU and the Green Deal investment plan are also set to exert a positive effect on investment decisions. Following a very weak 2019, our external environment is set to remain subdued. Foreign demand should strengthen, but only modestly. Combined with still high policy uncertainty, this is set to weigh on trade outlook in the euro area. This makes it unlikely that the euro area will benefit from external growth drivers in the next 2 years. Global growth remained subdued throughout 2019, but there are hints of a bottoming out. The volume of trade in goods rebounded modestly in the third quarter after contracting for 3 quarters in a row. Forward-looking global trade indicators have also been showing tentative signs of improvement. Global sentiment in manufacturing also seemed to have stabilized at the end of 2019, thanks to more new orders and export orders. This stabilization in global business sentiment partly reflects supportive macroeconomic policies, as well as some de-escalation of trade tensions thanks to the adoption of the Phase 1 trade deal between the US and China. Still, the outlook for global trade remains clouded by the persistent uncertainty associated with US trade policies. You are, of course, very interested in our take on the economic impact of the coronavirus. The fact is that any assessment of this is subject to large uncertainty. For this forecast, we have assumed that China's GDP will be affected mostly in the first quarter of 2020, with relatively limited global spillover. But this is an assumption, which is not a forecast, and is obviously subject to downside risks should the outbreak last longer or worsen further. Overall, the outlook for the global growth outside the EU is broadly unchanged since the autumn. Global GDP growth, excluding the EU but including UK, is projected to gradually pick up from 3.1 in 2019 to 3.3 in 2020 and 3.4 in 2021. This modest pickup is expected to be led by a moderate firming of growth in emerging market economies. World imports of goods and services, excluding the EU, are forecast to increase by 2.1 and 2.6 in 2020 and 2021, respectively, after an estimated growth rate of just 0.4 last year. Incoming data confirmed that the weakness in euro area manufacturing continued through the end of 2019, while other sectors, including services and construction, have shown resilience. We have now been seeing these sectoral divergences for almost 2 years. The recent months shown clear divergence of sentiment indicators and hard data. The December 2019 industrial production figures published yesterday by Eurostat showed a marked decline. At the same time, survey indicators such as the Commission's industry confidence, but also the Purchasing Managers' Index, have moved up in recent months. Still, they remain well below long-term averages, supporting the view that an actual upturn in manufacturing has yet to materialize. In 2019, the euro area labour market has been fairly resilient, given the background of moderate growth. Importantly, euro area unemployment decreased to 7.4 in December, the lowest rate since May 2008. However, since the labour market situation usually lags economic activity, the chances of further increases in employment appear limited. The Commission's survey on employment expectations suggests an easing of job creation, particularly in manufacturing, and hints at a stabilisation in the service sector. Euro area inflation remains low, though, as I said before, it picked up at the turn of the year. Our projection has been revised up slightly to 1.3% in 2020 and 1.4% in 2021, reflecting recent upward surprises in services and food inflation, as well as slightly higher oil price assumptions. Core inflation in the euro area, which excludes energy and unprocessed food, firmed from 1% to around 1.25% in the fourth quarter, as well as in January. This moderate pickup reflects higher price rises for services. As I mentioned, the economy of each EU member state is expected to grow in both 2020 and 2021, with the expansion in the euro area now the longest since our single currency's launch. The growth map continues to show heterogeneity across EU member states. Most Central and Eastern European economies are expected to grow faster than the large euro area countries. The German economy has been particularly hit last year by weaker export growth and the downturn in manufacturing. German exports are expected to recover only slowly over the next 2 years, as the demand for vehicles and investment goods is likely to remain weak. However, the buoyant services and construction sectors, strong wage growth, and some fiscal easing are set to continue supporting domestic demand. Overall, growth is forecast to reach 1.1 in 2020, helped by a strong calendar effect, 0.54 percentage points. In 2021, the manufacturing sector is expected to return to growth and benefit from more favourable external demand, and this should help GDP growth consolidate at 1.1. In France, growth decelerated sharply and was even slightly negative in the fourth quarter of 2019. Not surprisingly, the widespread strikes impacted French growth, as did maintenance works at the refinery. Going forward, the French economy is set to rebound to a relatively stable quarterly growth rate of around 0.3% over the next 2 years, and to grow at 1.1 in 2020 and 1.2 in 2021. In both years, domestic demand and private consumption in particular are expected to remain key growth drivers. By contrast, net exports are set to continue weighing on growth in 2020 and to turn only broadly neutral in 2021. In Italy, after 4 quarters of slowly rising growth, the economy contracted by 0.3 in the last quarter of 2019, according to Istat's preliminary estimate. Services seems to have held up, while industrial production declined. On the plus side, manufacturing is expected to stabilise and financing conditions are more favourable. Growth in Italy is expected to gradually gain traction from 0.2 in 2019 to 0.3 in 2020 and 0.6 in 2021. In Spain, growth held up better than expected in the second half of 2019, with robust contributions both from domestic demand and net exports. The economy thus grew 2% in 2019 as a whole. Resilient private consumption and recovering investment should allow growth to reach 1.6 in 2020 and 1.5 in 2021, above the euro area average and slightly higher than projected in the autumn. And in Poland, growth remained buoyant in 2019 at 4%, driven by domestic demand and investment in particular. Growth is expected to ease to a still solid 3.3%, both in 2020 and in 2021. Activity is set to be supported by strong private consumption growth, reflecting favourable labour market developments, strong consumer confidence and fiscal stimulus. The balance of risks to this forecast remains tilted to the downside. The euro area economy still faces a high degree of uncertainty, particularly regarding trade policies and the external environment. Firstly, the outbreak and spread of the coronavirus and its economic impact is a key downside risk. The fact that the duration and severity of the outbreak are unknown at this stage generates uncertainty over the near-term economic prospects in China and abroad. This uncertainty comes with broad-based global ramifications for manufacturing, with its cross-border supply chains, but it also has implications for services, including transport and tourism, both in and out of China. What is clear is that the longer the outbreak lasts, the higher the likelihood of knock-on effects on economic sentiment and global financing conditions. Secondly, speaking of external risks, both economic and trade policy uncertainty remain high, despite the recent US-China trade deal. Trade tensions could re-escalate and new trade barriers could be enacted. This could lead to a reversal of risk sentiment and tighter financing conditions. Third, there is still considerable uncertainty about future relations between the EU and UK after the expiration of the transition period at the end of this year. An abrupt change in trading and other economic relations would weigh on growth, mainly in the UK, but also in the EU. Fourth, we are mindful of the risks posed by geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, including, of course, swings in oil prices. Political and social turmoil in Latin America has also resurfaced, which risks postponing the expected recovery in this region. Finally, a reassessment of risks by financial markets or a change in their expectations could impact financial conditions and capital flows. This could affect especially emerging markets, but also countries such as the US, where corporate debt is at a record high. Such a development would weigh on the fragile recovery in global business confidence. Let me end my presentation by mentioning two upside risks for the European economy. First, we may see more growth-friendly fiscal policies, both in emerging markets and domestically, connected also to our growth strategy and the Green Deal. And second, we may still see positive spillovers from more benign financing conditions in some euro area countries. So to conclude, the outlook for Europe's economy is for stable, albeit subdued growth over the coming 2 years. This will prolong the longest period of expansion since the launch of the euro, but we will still face significant policy uncertainty, which casts a shadow over manufacturing in particular. As for the coronavirus, it is too soon to evaluate the extent of its negative economic impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are now ready to take your questions. Please raise your hand. I think the first question was Jorge here in the... No?
In italiano? Ero io?
Please go ahead. Jorge will be next.
Sono Giovanni Del Re di Avvenire. Commissario, una domanda sull'Italia. Colpisce sugli aspetti positivi che voi avete indicato, c'è il fatto che i consumi sarebbero stati favoriti dal reddito di cittadinanza e questo avrebbe favorito la crescita. L'altro elemento è anche positivo sugli investimenti pubblici, che sono un po' due punti cardine anche del governo attuale. Le volevo chiedere se magari può spiegarci un pochino meglio che cosa intendete, cioè in che modo questi due elementi, reddito di cittadinanza e investimenti pubblici, stanno aiutando la crescita in Italia. Grazie.
Well, I will answer in Italian. Quando noi registriamo gli effetti di alcune misure, tipo il reddito di cittadinanza, non diamo naturalmente una valutazione politica sulla congruità o meno di quella misura. Certamente è una misura che produce degli effetti distributivi e quindi tecnicamente misurabili in termini di crescita. Non confonderei questo con una valutazione positiva o negativa di queste misure e di altre.
Thank you.
Anche gli investimenti hanno un effetto positivo. Noi vorremmo un ritmo di investimenti molto più significativo, non soltanto in Italia, ma nell'insieme dell'Eurozona e dell'Unione Europea. Quindi lo sforzo di investimenti che è stato fatto in questi anni produce senz'altro degli effetti positivi, ma è sempre una questione di misura. La misura degli investimenti pubblici è tuttora largamente insufficiente. Ricordo che negli ultimi 10 anni la quota di investimenti pubblici è calata dal 3,7 al 3%.
Thank you very much.
Non in Italia.
Thank you. Jorge, please.
Good morning here. Jorge Valero with Euractiv. 2 questions as well. The first one on the coronavirus. You said that it's too early to assess the impact, but in fact, yesterday, for example, Standard & Poor's already said that this impact for the European economy could be between 0.1% and 0.2%. At the same time, you excluded the impact or the results of the EU-UK relationships, negotiations, and at the same time, I mean, as you said in the risk, there could be further disruption in the trade war. So I would like to know how confident are you in this forecast and how fragile it could be, this growth forecast, and you will be forced to revise it downwards in May. And secondly, on Spain, I would like to know whether you revised upwards the growth forecast last year, this year, and the next. So I would like to know whether this improvement of the Spanish economy gives further space to the Spanish government to increase spending as they want. If you have the opportunity to check the revised fiscal adjustment of the government, what is your opinion?
Well, thank you. About the coronavirus outbreak and the chance to have now a forecast on its impact. At the moment, the chance to have a forecast are very low because all depends on the duration, the extent of the consequence. That we will have consequences clear, but the extensions of these consequences strictly connected to the duration of and the extension of the outbreak of coronavirus. What is sure is, we based our winter forecast in an assumption and not in a forecast of the evolution of the epidemic, which we are not able to do in this moment. What is sure is that the global importance of China economy will produce an impact. We are looking frequently to comparison with the SARS epidemic in 2003, but I think we should remember that the share of Chinese economy in the global economy was at the time completely different from the share that we have now. It was 4.5% of the global economy, and it is now 17.7% of the global economy. And just to give you another figure, Chinese represent 18% of the global travel expenditure. So you can imagine in sectors connected to travel, so tourism, travel industries, if the outbreak is continuing, what kind of impact we can have. I think that we should update this in the next forecast, having more information, and obviously keeping in mind that we are dealing, first of all, with a human emergency, with a scientific challenge, and we do hope to deal with it and with its economic consequences in a better situation when we will present our next forecast. As far as Spain is concerned, we slightly reviewed our forecast of 0.1% in the positive in relation to the previous, the autumn forecast. So it was 1.9, it is now 2%. It is a very good level of growth in the average of the euro area. We are having continuously contact with Spanish authorities in view of the decision that the Spanish government has to take to present a new budget. And you know that we have the possibility to have a full budget with full powers from the government, and this is very important for us and for Spain.
Thank you. There's a lady on the left here. Thanks.
Very much, Maria Psara with Euronews. A question on Greece, Commissioner, because you were recently there in Athens and you predicted that the forecast would be much better. Given the slight increase for the 2020 and the unchanged forecast for the 2021, how would you describe the state of play for the Greek economy? Thank you.
Well, I think that the Greek economy, that as we know, suffered very tough conditions for several years, is now on the right track. I recently, as you remembered, visited the country, and in all the meetings I had this idea also of a positive sentiment about this in the country. This for sure is not solving the huge problems that the Greek government should address in any case in the coming years, but the results are good. The consequences of these results on financial markets are clear, and I think that the last visit of our mission will conclude with a positive report, and this will pave the way in June for the Eurogroup to take positive decision on the possibility for Greece to use the AMFA SMP for investments.
Thank you. Gentleman in the middle.
Tobias Kaiser, Die Welt. Thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry, I have to get back to the virus as well. Could you tell us a bit more in more detail what the assumptions regarding the coronavirus are that figured into this forecast, and maybe also the estimate which European countries might be mostly affected by the virus? And a question regarding Germany, do you think that the fiscal stance and the labor market developments will offset the decline in manufacturing activity? Thank you.
Yes. Well, as I said in my presentation, our assumption is not a forecast. Sorry for the. It looks like a little bit playing with words, but it is important to reassess this. Our assumption is on the consequences that we can imagine on the first quarter, and obviously we can imagine that these consequences could be, if they are limited to the first quarter, could have a limited extension. But the reason of the fact that we are not having a forecast on the consequences of coronavirus is that it is very difficult now to have any reasonable prevision on the duration of this outbreak and on the extension of this outbreak. Depending on the duration, I think in the next weeks and months, reasonable forecasting will be possible, hoping, I repeat, that we will have better conditions. As far as the most affected countries, I think it is obvious that the main problems will affect global supply chain, especially in manufacture, and will affect sectors like tourism, travel, in a first phase. But then, I repeat, it depends on the duration and on the extension of the outbreak, and we really hope that this could be strongly limited. As far as the German fiscal policy is concerned, as you know, the Commission is always asking that countries having fiscal space use this fiscal space for investment, and this is something that I can repeat also now, even if this is not the day of presenting country reports or country recommendation, but it is the day of presenting a photography of the situation. But the position of the Commission is clear. We need, for countries with fiscal space, to use this fiscal space in a more expansionary way.
Okay. Elodie?
Merci. Élodie Lamère du journal belge Le Soir. Deux questions sur la Belgique, en français si je peux. Vos prévisions de croissance sont plus pessimistes que celles de la Belgique. Est-ce que vous pouvez expliquer pourquoi? Ensuite, les derniers chiffres publiés récemment par le Bureau fédéral du plan montrent que le déficit va atteindre à peu près 2,5% du PIB cette année, sachant qu'on a déjà des problèmes de dette et que vous avez dit, ou en tout cas votre prédécesseur a dit qu'il serait, que la Commission allait être bienveillante et compréhensive tant qu'on n'avait pas de gouvernement. Combien de temps est-ce qu'on peut laisser la situation se dégrader et qu'est-ce que vous demandez aux autorités belges à ce stade? Merci.
Bon, comme vous avez dit, on enregistre dans notre analyse une situation les prévisions de croissance ne sont pas en soi négatives. Ils sont aussi légèrement meilleurés, les prévisions de croissance en relation aux nos prévisions de l'automne. Mais naturellement, le désir de la Commission est de pouvoir le plus vite que possible installer un dialogue avec un gouvernement capable d'avoir de pleins pouvoirs et un projet de budget sur lequel discuter de l'avenir, parce qu'il y a sûrement de problèmes à voir. On a une croissance un peu mieux qu'on avait dans nos prévisions, mais on a beaucoup de problèmes à aborder ensemble. Et j'espère qu'on pourrait discuter ça le plus tôt que possible avec un gouvernement avec la plénitude des pouvoirs.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions, so please raise your hand if still. I see David, and then the last question will be for you.
David Carretta, Radio Radicale in italiano. Commissario, l'Italia cresce per l'ennesima volta, è l'ultimo paese della zona euro dell'Unione Europea in termini di crescita e il divario rispetto alla media si allarga. Quali sono le ragioni di questo ritardo e le politiche attuali del governo, visto che facciamo una fotografia, sono quelle adeguate per affrontare il problema di crescita dell'Italia?
Ma la fotografia non facilita le valutazioni sulle politiche, valutazioni che, come sapete, faremo nel corso del semestre. Ci saranno diversi passaggi, avremo i report paese per paese, poi le raccomandazioni nei confronti dei vari paesi, poi esamineremo i programmi di riforma e di stabilità dei diversi paesi e alla fine di maggio, inizio giugno, la Commissione darà le sue opinioni. Quello che registriamo per quanto riguarda l'Italia è certamente nel quadro di un rallentamento generale della crescita economica nell'Eurozona, di cui queste previsioni sono conferma, che era già emerso l'anno scorso. Certamente il rallentamento è più accentuato in Italia, nonostante il dato finale del 2019 sia di uno 0,1 più favorevole di quelle che erano le nostre previsioni, ma comunque stiamo parlando di un rallentamento che in Italia è più accentuato. Certamente il Paese risente, come altri, di alcuni fattori esterni che investono in particolare l'industria e il settore delle esportazioni, ma altrettanto certamente ci sarà bisogno di lavorare molto nei prossimi mesi. Sono convinto che il Governo instaurerà un dialogo con la Commissione perché questo lavoro vada nella buona direzione.
Thank you. Last question here, please.
Francesco Guarascio, Reuters. one last attempt on the coronavirus. I mean, you have said it several times. It's very difficult to make assessments now. Still, you are giving us a forecast for the EU economy for this year. So my question is, have you taken into account the impact of the coronavirus outbreak in your current forecast, or not at all? And if you have taken it into account, is it zero at the moment as things stand now? With things that you know at the moment, is the impact zero, negative impact of 0.1% on growth this year, more? Thanks.
Well, the assumption that we made for this forecast is to having coronavirus as other things that I mentioned in my presentation in the downside risks that we could face. The reason of this decision to not include an assessment of the future development of this outbreak of coronavirus is, as I said, that it is really difficult. You know, by the way, that this winter forecast had a closing day at the very beginning of February, so I think 8 or 9 days ago it was closed, and we can't play with forecast and figures. We all know that we have this, as I repeated, as a very substantial downside risk in our forecast, but to say how this risk will be great or not, it's very, for an institution like the European Commission, is very early now to assess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for being here.